Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are honored to be sitting down with Jason Chlipala. He is the COO of the Stellar Development Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jason.
Thank you. Yeah, really happy to be here.
So, how did you get connected with Stellar?
Yeah, like so many things, it was pretty random. So I used to live in New York. I worked at a company called Palantir Technologies in New York, and then was there for quite a few years. Then for personal, slash family reasons, decided to make the move to Los Angeles. And it just felt like a good time to sort of look for a new thing. And also at that point, there wasn't a whole lot going on at Palantir on the West Coast. Would have had to travel a lot. And I just wasn't interested in that. And so I ended up working at a few smaller startups in the LA area. And I was looking for my next thing. And I just happened to be talking to a blockchain focused company in LA. And that was because I knew someone from Palantir working there. And then very randomly, a former coworker said, "Hey, if you're into blockchain, you should check out this other company, which is called Chain." And at the time, I wasn't really into blockchain. I was just looking for companies that made sense in my area, for my area, my experience. And so I started talking to Chain, met the team there, and really liked them and really liked what I was hearing. And at the time, they were building a product. It was essentially an internal blockchain-based database. You could almost think of it as. And so, the parallels with working at Palantir, which is all about data integration and data management. So just kind of clicked with them. And so I ended up joining Chain, and Chain ended up getting acquired by a company called Interstellar, which you can almost think of like the for-profit arm of Stellar. And that's how I got into the Stellar world. And this is actually probably a good place to explain what the Stellar Development Foundation is. So Stellar, of course, is a public blockchain. The technology is open source. Stellar, I think of as the network slash the technology. The Stellar Development Foundation, which is where I work now, is a nonprofit, non-stock company that is created to shepherd the Stellar network. So, we work to make Stellar successful, but it's pretty important to remember that SDF, the foundation, is different from the actual network. But back to my story. So I ended up at Interstellar through this acquisition, was there for a little bit, and then made the decision to switch over to the foundation itself, where would be working on everything Stellar related and not just the things that Interstellar was doing. So that was my path. I knew about blockchain, of course, but I wasn't really into it. I actually personally have never traded any crypto, so it's not like I was sort of looking to get into blockchain. It's just one of those things that through connections and relationships, this is where I landed.
What do you work on a day-to-day basis? What is development at Stellar consisting of? And what are the use cases that it's being used for in the now?
So at SDF, we view our mission is help increase access to the global financial system. So one way you can think of Stellar is it is an open network meant to connect financial infrastructure. So that's the point of it. It's to connect, to make the financial system more open and allow people to access it. In terms of use cases, I would say probably our core use case is payments, and that was certainly the number one use case that the creators of Stellar, Jed McCaleb, David Mazieres, and others had in mind when they were creating Stellar. So very importantly, on Stellar, being able to create assets or tokenize asset types is a native part of the protocol. On Ethereum, as I'm sure you know, there's the standard ERC20. So that's creating a smart contract that operates like a token or operates like a tokenized asset. On Stellar, a tokenized asset is a native part of the protocol. It's built right in. And so the idea is with Stellar, you can create digital representations of any asset including fiat currencies, and then use the Stellar rails to send those anywhere. And it is very cheap and very fast. In terms of cost, the transaction fees are I think currently our minimum transaction fee is 100 stroops, and each stroop is a very, very, very small fraction of a lumen. I have to confess, I can never remember if it's 10 to the -8 or 10 to the -7. I can't remember, but it's a very, very small fraction. So for $1, you can do many, many, many transactions. And it's very fast because Stellar, interestingly, it's not a mined network the way Bitcoin or Ethereum is. It's a so-called pre-mined network. So it's not doing all of the computational overhead of something like a proof of work consensus algorithm. Because it doesn't have to do that, it's very fast. So we close a new ledger roughly every 4 to 5 seconds. So it's very, very quick. So that's the probably the core use case, I would say, is payments. And then another very important use case is digitizing regulated assets. So this would be like securities. So like I said, with Stellar, a native part of the protocol, you can create arbitrary asset types. So you can create an asset type for Apple stock and then use Stellar to send that and also trade that. And I really should have mentioned that another unique feature of the Stellar network is that it has a built-in decentralized exchange. So each node running Stellar, when we talk about the ledger, it has a ledger that shows which accounts own what assets, and the ledger also has an entire order book, meaning we have a decentralized exchange. So you can trade any of the assets that are on Stellar. So those are the two main use cases.
What's the development process look like today? What's your main focus on a day-to-day basis?
So we are very focused on continuing to build out what we call our anchors. We use the term anchor to mean any entity. It's almost always a regulated entity, a regulated financial institution of some type, excuse me, that bridges between the non-stellar world and the stellar world. So the simplest way to think of this would be an issuer of a stable coin. So if, for example, there's a company in Mexico called Saldo, so you can deposit fiat Mexican pesos with Saldo, and then Saldo will issue a stellar Mexican peso asset. And that's why we refer to them as anchors, because they are anchoring the stellar existence, the stellar asset, to the non-stellar world or the traditional financial world. So we are very focused on building out that anchor network because those are the on and off ramps to actually using Stellar. If you have pesos and you want to send money to someone in the US, you need to turn those pesos into a Stellar asset. You can then use Stellar to, like we talked about, very quickly, very cheaply move those pesos to the recipient. Also, using that built-in decentralized exchange, you can easily exchange your pesos for dollars. And then on the other end, once the recipient is holding the Stellar dollar asset, they would then use an anchor, a dollar anchor in this case, to turn, if they want, to redeem the Stellar dollar asset for actual fiat dollars. And we actually announced last month that USDC has now launched and is live on Stellar. So we are another one of, I think we're the third network now, might be the fourth, I can't remember, that USDC is on. So now we have this very large, very liquid dollar stablecoin. So to your question of what are we focused on, we're focused on continuing to build out that network. So, eventually the goal is we would have anchors in every single currency. So every single country you can think of, there's an anchor, so that if you then want to turn your fiat money into a Stellar asset, you can, and then you can trade it or send it all over the world. So we're very focused on that. That's probably our main focus at the moment.
So could you kind of speak to that? that path that Stellar has been on over the years?
Yeah, of course, of course. Um, the way I like to think of it is Stellar is not meant to be an answer to all things, and not even an answer to all things financial. Stellar was designed, like we talked about, with some pretty precise use cases in mind, and it's designed to do those really, really well and not other things. So, for example, Stellar does not have a concept of smart contracts the way Ethereum, of course, does. So we do not have a Turing complete scripting language as part of Stellar. But in the realm of payments or in the realm of digitizing regulated assets, Stellar is great at it. And some of that reason is precisely because it is narrow. It does have a focus. So that's something that really drew me to the technology, because I think that's going to make it successful. And so we are now working with the Ukrainian Ministry of Digital Transformation, and we are working on a variety of projects. That announcement was we signed a memorandum of cooperation with them, and so we're the two main things are they are in the process of thinking through a general virtual asset strategy for the country as a whole. So we will be just one of the organizations involved in that process, giving our feedback and helping them think through what policies, what strategy makes sense in the realm of virtual assets. We also will be working with them to think through the development or the potential for a CBDC, a central bank digital currency in Ukraine. It is worth noting the Ministry of Digital Transformation is separate and distinct from the Central Bank of Ukraine, which is the National Bank of Ukraine. So any ultimate decisions about CBDCs will be made by the central bank, not the ministry. But the ministry, of course, is still involved in thinking through these ideas. So we're in conversations with them on that topic, and also the topic of stable coins and how they would fit into this broader strategy. So we were very excited to be able to announce that. I personally am I'm really impressed by the sort of vision and foresight that the ministry is already showing around these areas. And Ukraine is a very interesting country for blockchain in general and cryptocurrency. It's a very important remittance corridor, and they also have quite a ton of tech talent. I mean, actually, a lot of blockchain companies have large engineering groups in Ukraine. And so it's just very, very well positioned to develop smart policies around digital assets, and then also to have a population that will really use them. So we're really excited by that work. And we are talking to other central banks and other sort of similar governmental organizations, even if they're not actually the central bank, around this broader question of CBDCs. Because in a way, Stellar was thinking about stablecoins even before stablecoin was a term. And CBDCs you kind of think of them as another example of a stablecoin, in this case, issued directly by the central bank. But I think the feature set of Stellar really fits nicely with that realm of CBDCs and stablecoins.
What about your work history made you a good fit at the Stellar Development Foundation?
I mean, for one thing, so I'm the COO, so all of the operations roll up to me. So I actually really like that role because it kind of is a mix of, the operational side, but then also the strategic side. So I started my career, I had kind of a weird path. I studied math and physics in college and thought I was going to just go the pure academic route, but it's actually a pretty weird story. I did a research program over the summer, one of my summers, and there was a day so this is pure math, dynamical systems, which is like discrete differential equations. There was one day where I walked into my advisor's office and I asked him the question that I had. We talked for a little bit. And then before I left, I kind of sighed to myself and I said, Joel, your shirt is on backwards. And he was wearing a polo shirt, like it had a collar, and it was on backwards. And so that that moment really made me think, I don't know if I want to go the really pure academia route, because I could tell that I really loved math, but like I didn't love it enough that I could just make it my absolute life day in, day out. So I then took this kind of left turn. I went to law school, and so started my career as a lawyer. And then I switched over to Palantir, where I did the business side, just leading large projects, leading teams of engineers and data scientists and designers. And so to get back to your question, I like the COO role because it's kind of a combination of that operational thing, thinking about things like legal issues and sort of the nuts and bolts of how things work. But then you also get the strategic side of the business side and the sorts of things I did at Palantir. So I really like that mix. I also, I tell people this all the time. One of the things that I really love about working at SDF and working in this space is you get to think about like big macroeconomic concepts quite a bit. And I don't know, to me, I was surprised by that. I think that's kind of unique for tech jobs, quite frankly. Sometimes it can get very insular, and you're just thinking about tweaking a feature and how can you get more users, et cetera. But in this space where we're all thinking about how do we innovate and revolutionize financial services and technology, you really have to think about big things like balance of payments and trade and monetary policy and liquidity. I spend a lot of time thinking about liquidity and how can we create, efficient or encourage efficient markets on our DEX and elsewhere. And so I really love that. And I guess you asked what makes me a good fit. I guess the fact that I like those sorts of questions, a lot of opportunities to sort of nerd out on the big picture stuff, and you can get quite theoretical, but then at the end of the day, you then have to drill down to okay, so what should we actually do about this, and what are the concrete steps to actually take? So I think those are the things that's why it makes sense for me.
What are some of the things you chew on most when it comes to the macroeconomics as it relates to Stellar? And of course, your task at hand.
So something I've been thinking about a lot lately is, so this is around CBDCs. So one of the big questions is permissioned versus permissionless networks. And that's been a topic people talk about for a few years now, but especially in the realm of CBDCs, there's this question of, will any central banks ever be okay issuing onto an open permissionless network like Stellar, for example? So I've been thinking a lot about the implications, the different implications of having a CBDC on a permissioned network versus a permissionless. And to me, where I'm kind of landing is, I think it's a question of digital currency versus digital cash. And to the extent that there are central banks that do want digital cash, and by that I mean a digital thing, let's just call it a thing, that acts cash-like. So it's it's pretty close to bearer. Obviously cash, you own cash if you hold it. To the extent central banks want that, I think that a permissionless network, or rather a permissionless blockchain, distributed ledger, I think that is the most effective way to actually implement that. Because if you do want it to be cash-like, doing that on a permissioned network doesn't really work, because at the end of the day, it's not cash-like. You're depending on whoever's operating that network to operate it correctly and validly. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about. And I should be clear, not every central bank is going to want that. Not every central bank is going to want a cash-like instrument. They're going to want something that's more like pure account-based money, and that's fine. It's still early days, but I think it will be interesting to see how different central banks have different goals. if you read about CBDCs, it's been interesting to see how a lot of island nations have been very have been early on this, like the Bahamas and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And so, it's been interesting to see how those areas, CBDCs are much more attractive to them, and could they potentially be more interested in something more like digital cash as opposed to digital currency? So that's one of the kind of big picture macro things to think a lot about. And then because we are in the payments area and think about remittances a lot, also do a lot of thinking about various payment corridors and symmetric corridors, one where you have flows going in both directions, and asymmetric. And in the case of asymmetric corridors, how can you still make those efficient and things like that. Those are the things that come to mind.
One of the things I find most fascinating about the Bahamas sand dollar is that the
Yeah,
Bahamas are an archipelago. So it's a cluster or group of islands. And so
yeah,
so throughout that experiment, they get to see firsthand how a digital currency at the nation state level might work across continents theoretically.
yeah. hmm Yeah, no, absolutely. And you also get like the Eastern Caribbean, for example, the ECCB, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. That's also interesting because that is I, I don't know if economic union is the right technical term, but it's like the EU. That is this collection of separate countries that all share a currency, share a central bank. And so, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's like perfect for CBDCs because making cross-border payments more efficient, faster and better makes a lot of sense for an area where there's so much cross-border movement. And then, as you point out, even within a single country, when you're an archipelago, I mean, it's not cross-border, but it is cross like physical border. You're crossing water, and so the ability to have a cash-like instrument that can be held electronically is just hugely valuable. Including when you think about things like natural disasters and the fact that brick and mortar, bank branches could literally be destroyed. And so I think there's a lot of promise there.
To what degree do you deploy mathematics in your work at Stellar?
You know, I find that like the ship has sailed on me being the one to actually build something like hands on keyboard, really building it. But I like to think of it as I'm able to, draw boxes and arrows on a whiteboard, and often, there can be a lot of complexity there. And so the ability to think, logically in that way and understand logical connection, I think I find it to be incredibly valuable. Is that mathematics? I don't know. I mean, if you if you think of math as sort of the study of structure or studying logic, and how logical arguments can be made using symbols. I mean, sure, I use it that way, but I'm not sure I used like the math I was doing when in that research summer that much. But then again, I mean, it's like there were no numbers in that. It wasn't the most practical stuff for what I'm doing. But yeah, I find what's most valuable is, like being technical. Like, so in my mind, what does it mean to be technical? It means you can understand how, like in this area of software, how software is put together. You can understand what would be hard to do or what would be easy to do. In my job, I'm not expected to then suggest exactly how you would build it, but I need to know, oh, if we try to do that feature, that's gonna take a huge team and be really, really hard to figure out, or that's gonna be really simple. That's the level you need. And actually at Palantir, because I had been a lawyer, and we had actually a good number of former lawyers who joined in business roles. People would often come to me and sort of ask about, hey, how can I like get more technical or get more comfortable with this stuff? And often people would say like, hey, great news. I'm doing this coding course online. I'm learning Python. And I would say, hey, that's great. Coding is really fun. It's great to know. You should totally do that. If you're enjoying it, you should like keep going. That's great to do. But for getting more technical in your job, Wikipedia is the thing you should actually be using more. Like, you're never going to be in a meeting and you're going to be talking to engineers and then you're going to say, oh, I have an idea. Let's use a for loop for that. You're never going to like use your Python course in that way. But Wikipedia, just understanding the words that people are saying and also, really understanding them. So again, using the Wikipedia analogy, like not just reading through the first entry, but then clicking into the links and really understanding how it all fits together. I find that's what it means to be technical in just sort of the software technology industry in general. So that's where I've found what I found to be the most valuable, and quite frankly, also sort of gains you the most credibility with like engineers and really technical people, is understanding the concepts. That's how I think of it. Getting back to the question about math, I mean, like algorithms and math are very similar. So that is an area where I think the math training or just experience doing a lot of math definitely comes in. Really thinking through it, like stepping through in your head, what are the precise steps that it would take to solve a particular problem. I see a lot of parallels there, and I mean, obviously, like theory of computation is an extremely mathematical discipline. So that's definitely an area where, I don't know, maybe that gave me a little bit of a leg up. But I think a lot of it is also, like you said, of not don't just turn the lights on and look around, but like really digging into this stuff and making sure you've actually absorbed it and synthesized it for yourself. I think that's a lot of the that's like the hard part, and that's also where you get a lot of the value.
Did you have much experience with software engineering before Stellar?
Some. I mean, I did a fair amount of CS in college. I mean, it's actually kind of funny. My brother is a computer science professor at MIT, and so growing up, that was his thing. He was programming, from super early age, and his older brother, it was just kind of his thing. And so I think I had this view of like, when it was time to decide what to major in, it's like, I'm not going to major in computer science because that's what he does. My thing is going to be this over here. I didn't know that now, like, every job was going to basically be computer science when I made that decision. So like, I did some coding in college, and I would sort of play around with it on my own, but like, I've never been a software engineer. I've never had to actually, build professional code or software. But again, I've always been close to it, and I claim to be able to understand it well. But I wouldn't. It would take me a very long time to actually build this stuff.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you face currently at Stellar Development Foundation?
I mean, one that comes to mind is and I think everyone feels this way in the industry, just continuing to get more clarity around the regulatory landscape. I mean, as we were talking about anchors, the regulated entities we view that as an important part of the overall Stellar ecosystem. We are not looking to replace or supplant the financial system. We're looking for ways to connect to it, to give more access to it, and therefore regulation and the laws are really important. So just being able to better get more clarity. So whether that's things like the proposed Stable Act in the U.S., or right now the Central Bank of Nigeria has released in the last 3 months some various new interpretations and announcements around cryptocurrency. So getting more clarity there, and continuing to help regulators and legislators just understand the technology better. That's one of the challenges, and that's one of the things at SDF we spend a lot of time doing. So our CEO, Danelle Dixon, she speaks with legislators and our general counsel, and we have a policy team. So that's something we're very focused on. That's one of the challenges. Outside of that, let me think, what else? Well, another one I did touch on is just thinking about liquidity. So continuing to build up that network of anchors, and then continuing to find the applications, or like the payments companies, the end users in a way, the applications that are going to use the Stellar rails to make payments, to do things like remittances, and hopefully stitching that together in a way that all of the liquidity works, that we have nice balanced flows, and that these are efficient markets for everyone. So that's something we're very focused on, but that's also kind of the fun of doing it. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
Bitcoin's white paper describes it as a peer-to-peer electronic cash, and there were indeed many attempts to improve upon its model over the years. Right away, there was Litecoin, which was envisaged at the time as the digital silver to Bitcoin's
Mm.
digital gold. And
Yeah.
perhaps historically, silver was kind of used more as the currency of the people throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where so many projects have failed, Stellar has actually excelled. Could you kind of speak to that? Is the team aware, particularly at the Stellar Development Foundation, about the stated purpose of Bitcoin, the way in which it's failed, and how Stellar's kind of still carrying that flag?
From my point of view, I mean, I think Bitcoin obviously is a success. I don't know how anyone could argue that. I mean, with Tesla buying $1.5 billion worth, clearly Bitcoin is a success. I mean, I actually think of it as Bitcoin is the first very clear use case for blockchain. Um, Now, I do not think of Bitcoin for payments. I think of Bitcoin more for store of value, or for investment, speculative investment, and I think that is here to stay. On the payment side, when you think about what does a payments network need, I mean, one of the things is speed, and I think just because of the design of Bitcoin and the proof of work, consensus model, it's just never going to be fast enough. So to your question of sort of how have we succeeded, I mean, I think that's a really key part of it. And again, like I said, Stellar was designed with payments in mind, so it's no surprise that it's really well suited for that. So I think that's the key difference, that we have the feature set that can support payments. I think another, beyond just the speed, another aspect of this is that um, we have this anchor model where there will be stable coins. There will be digital representations of fiat on Stellar. You don't have to use some cryptocurrency. You can just use the currency that people are familiar with, and that governments are familiar with. I mean, to my mind, that is going to be the way that blockchain payments, if you want to call it that, really takes off, is using things like USDC for these payments. Because I mean, I think it just makes sense. If you're a payments company and you're going to be making payments, you can either hold USDC, or you can hold some other non-fiat asset, and where the value fluctuates a lot. So I think that's the other reason that we are succeeding, because obviously there's a lot of work to be done, is that we're it's sort of more stable coin focused than I think some of the earlier networks were, which again were not designed specifically for payments. So it makes sense that they wouldn't be.
What's most exciting to you right now in your work at Stellar Development Foundation?
Two answers. So one, I am very excited about CBDCs, and we'll see if they end up on Stellar or not. But I'm just excited in general about them. It really does feel like it's sort of happening. There's more conversation about it, and more real conversation about it. Um, I think it's kind of interesting. Like when I started at Palantir, I think pretty much everyone knew big data was a thing, but they didn't actually know what it was. And then over time, people actually understood it. I've seen a very similar process here in the blockchain industry, and with even CBDCs in particular, that people are now like actually understand what they would be. There's still a ton of education that needs to happen, but it's sort of moved beyond the like the buzzword phase, and now people are getting serious about, okay, if we're actually going to do this, how do we do it? So I'm excited about CBDCs in general. Um, and then I'd also just say I'm really excited to see, have the USDC launch on Stellar. I think having this large, very liquid, reserve currency essentially, because obviously the dollar is the main reserve currency. I'm just really excited to see what our community does with that. What all of the developers and different companies building on Stellar what that unlocks for them. Because obviously over these past 2 years, we've seen that stable coins are hugely impactful and can really open up a lot of possibilities. So I'm really excited to see what happens there too.
So I'm curious, like what strengths does Stellar bring to the table for use cases such as CBDCs or a USDC that differentiates it from other platforms?
I think the biggest thing is the feature set for issuers. So for the like Circle is the issuer of USDC, or if you think about a CBDC, presumably it would be a central bank would be the one actually issuing it. Stellar, I would say, has a unique feature set for issuers because it was designed with them in mind. So for example, when you create or issue an asset on Stellar, if you want, you can make it, we call it auth required. So basically you can make it so that that asset can only go into accounts that you have authorized, or whitelisted. So you can of course imagine as an issuer, that's a really nice feature to have, because maybe you want to make it so that you have to KYC an account before it can hold your asset. So you KYC accounts once, but then the nice thing is after that, you don't have to be part of the process anymore. The asset can move around freely, can be traded, can be transferred, and you can know that it will never hit an account that you don't know anything about. So that is a very issuer friendly feature. Another feature, and this one's harder to explain, it's a little more subtle, but has to do with the way the Stellar Consensus Protocol works. So your SCP, Stellar Consensus Protocol. We like to talk about a concept called issuer enforced finality. And in a way, it's kind of technical to explain it fully, but basically I think of it as it combines much of the control an issuer would have in a private permissioned network with the openness of a permissionless network. So the way, at a high level, the way SCP works is each validator on the network picks a set of other validators that it is going to listen to. And we call that their quorum set. And the way consensus is reached is every time there's a new potential ledger, each validator looks to see if the other nodes in its quorum set are voting for that ledger. And if they are, then it also votes for it. And there are granular details of, you can set up a quorum set and then define how many nodes need to vote for a ledger. So you could have 4 validators in your node in your quorum set, and you could say, if 3 out of the 4 agree, I'll vote for this ledger as well. So in that way, each validator knows who it is relying on or who it is trusting. And contrast this with a proof of work consensus like Bitcoin, where you of course don't know anything about the computers that are doing the proof of work and therefore contributing to consensus. So as we all know, theoretically, if one bad actor had enough hashing power, they could theoretically do a double spend on something like Bitcoin, as unlikely as that is. But on Stellar, you don't have this situation of sort of relying on anonymous actors. You know exactly who you are relying on for consensus. And so, if you think of the central bank example, if we get to a world where multiple central banks have issued CBDCs onto Stellar, they could, for example, each run their own validator, and they could put other central banks in their quorum set. And in that way, they could feel really good about what organizations are contributing to consensus on this network. So I think I think that's really unique. And to your point of sort of being underrated, it's not the simplest thing to understand. So that's one of the things we're working really hard on is just getting more visible, getting more visibility for Stellar, and just talking about these things more and more, and really stressing how this feature set is good for issuers. But those are some of the things that I think are kind of unique to us.
For a research and development department at the enterprise level that's researching cryptocurrency applications, blockchain based systems, perhaps to build a product, what would you tell them about Stellar? Let's say they know more about Ethereum, for instance. What would you tell them about Stellar? And let's assume that their use case lines up.
For one thing, we have really good documentation. We hear that all the time, that people are very happy with Stellar documentation. So I think that's a pretty practical thing that a team like that would care about. But I would stress these things I've been saying about how it was designed with payments in mind. So I think my basic point to them would be, if you want to move value quickly and efficiently, Stellar is a great choice for that, and has a feature set that was designed with that use case in mind. And so to the extent that's what they're trying to do, they should absolutely check out Stellar. And like I was talking about before, that's not going to be everything. And again, I think that's an important part of this. We actually are not looking to be everything. We don't want. It's not the case that every project should use Stellar, but if payments is sort of a key pattern of what you're trying to build, if you're trying to move value from one place to another, and especially if there's a cross-border aspect, if you need to be able to convert one asset type, like a currency, into another asset type, like another currency, then Stellar was built with that in mind and has these native features that will make developing very easy.
When it comes to central bank digital currencies and the work you've seen done on them, how do you think Stellar ties in? What are your thoughts in that universe?
Right now, we are most focused on education and getting the right stakeholders to understand the different possible ways something like a Stellar could fit in. So, for example, one of the key questions a lot of people are thinking about is, if you did have a CBDC, would you have a so-called two-tier system or a single tier? Would the central bank issue the CBDC, the digital asset, directly to individuals? That would be a single tier system. Or will the central bank issue the CBDC to commercial banks, and then those banks would maybe they would send the actual CBDC to individuals, or maybe they would actually never, they would just hold the CBDC and issue like a stable coin, for example, I call it like a bank stable coin. So those one of the things people are thinking about. So right now we're most focused on helping people think through those sorts of ideas, and also really trying to stress the public-private nature of this. There are of course a ton of policy considerations to be had, a ton of non-technical questions that need to be asked and answered around CBDCs. And sometimes people have a tendency to want to say, let's think about those policy questions first, and then we'll get to the tech. And for some of those, that makes sense. But there is also this this kind of intersection where the tech and the policy become really intertwined. Like we were talking about earlier, about if you want a cash-like instrument, I would say you need a permissionless network. So that's an example of where the policy questions and the tech questions really connect. And so we're trying to sort of be in as many of those conversations as possible, and also help point out where are those intersection points, and maybe where are places where no, that's you should just think about that purely as a policy matter. And frankly, we also want to be part of these conversations because there may be things that should be added or changed with Stellar. Like, I think it would be silly to think that Stellar as it exists today has 100% of the features needed for CBDCs. That, oh wow, we like, man, that Jed, he's a smart guy. He just nailed it, 4 years ago, and we don't need to add a single thing. Obviously, that's not the case. Software is all about iteration. So that's where the public-private comes in. I mean, we want to be part of these conversations so that if there are things that should change, like the Stellar community as a whole, because obviously it is an open source network, can consider these changes and modify as needed. So that's another reason that I think it's really important, and that's how we're trying to fit in.
Do you have any comments on the state of tokenization on top of Stellar?
In a way, like that's what Stellar is for. It's to tokenize different assets. Many of them are fiat currencies, but then also, like we said, regulated assets like equities. We have a company that we actually invested in called D-Stock, which does exactly that. By tokenizing equities onto Stellar, they're able to give people in places like South Africa the ability to invest in companies. So, I mean, I think the state of tokenization on Stellar is very strong. That's what it was designed for, and we're seeing more and more assets. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but we do we release a quarterly report every quarter, and then also do kind of an update call with different press and analysts. And in that quarterly report, we have numbers on how the number of assets has grown and the number of payments and similar data, and all of those numbers are looking excellent for Stellar. So again, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think something like 90% of all transactions ever on Stellar have occurred in the last year. It's some very high percentage. So I think the state of tokenization is very strong.
Does it surprise you that there's been so little attention placed on Stellar as far as it goes, as far as tokens go, compared to a platform like Ethereum?
Not really. I mean, I'm fine with it. Like, I think in a way this almost goes back to your very first question of how I got into this and how I said I wasn't like into blockchain and looking for something. I sort of ended up here. I'm fine with us just continuing to steadily improve what we're doing and get more and more real usage. If there's lots of attention or not, that's not what it's about. It is kind of a unique aspect of the Stellar Development Foundation that we are a nonprofit, non-stock company, and what that means is we literally don't have shareholders. We're not a charity. We do pay taxes, but we don't have shareholders, and so that means we can just be laser focused on that mission of trying to create equitable access to the global financial system, and just continue to build out our anchor network, get additional payments companies and businesses that are actually using that to do efficient cross-border payments. Continue to get great partners like Circle and USDC. So as far as like the broader like token community, I'm okay with whatever level of press we get.
What's next for SDF?
All of the stuff we've been talking about, building out Anchor Network, finding more applications. We are also really starting to focus on the network effects of everything that's going on Stellar. So starting to really think in terms of, okay, how can that network participant really help out that other network participant, and start to sort of get that flywheel going, and the network effects of kind of the value being in the square of the number of participants. So that's a really big focus for us as we continue to grow. We are also we have kind of ramped up what we call our enterprise fund, and you can also read about that in the quarterly reports, or you can read about it on the stellar.org website. And that's a venture style fund that we use to make investments into companies that can help Stellar, basically, that will be building businesses and products that help the entire Stellar network and community. So we've made I don't remember the exact total dollars we've invested, but we've done a number of investments. Most recently, a company called Wire that we're very excited about. So that's another what's next. We're going to continue to invest and just try to grow the network.
We've been honored to speak today with Jason Chlipala, the COO of the Stellar Development Foundation. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today. Where can people find you?
Please do check out stellar.org. There's a lot of great information, including that documentation that is excellent, but also a lot of information about our overall mission and mandate, and information about all the great businesses and companies that are building on Stellar today. So I would encourage people to check out stellar.org.
Thank you, Jason, for joining us today, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much.